No, my stage. Calm down, boss. The sight of the stage being eroded into a muddy mess by Kelvin's contaminated mud bind evoked a scream that came from the very depths of Caesar's soul. His apprentices had to hold him back as he attempted to jump down onto the stage in his frenzy. As you can see, half of the stage has been entirely ruined and the fight has only just begun. I've heard that Caesar San visited the mines himself to procure materials of the greatest purity and best quality. Yet his efforts have been for nothing, with the only record broken here being the speed at which his prized creation was utterly destroyed. Unlike in Gon, where most fights are based on brawn and physical prowess, it is common to use magic in other countries. Perhaps he should take that into consideration for his next work. Dearie, if he succeeds in making a stage that cannot be destroyed even by magic, every country will be making him offers. But this is hardly the time for that. Keep your eyes on the stage, the next exchange is coming. Just as Goldiana said, Kelvin and Sylvia were about to unleash their next moves. Obsidian Edge. Wintry Expanse. Behind Kelvin's back floated 4 4-meter-long black swords fashioned from the material of the stage itself. Kelvin was hovering high up in the air thanks to the fly spell. He whistled. Talk about a close call. If I'd been slower by a split second, you would have had my legs. Says the person who tried to crush me into a quagmire. Touché. The stage that Sylvia was standing on was no longer a bottomless bog. Instead, the whole thing, quagmire and all, had been converted into a huge block of ice. In fact, the entire ground inside Colette's barrier was now Sylvia's territory. A rank of blue magic spell, huh? If I'm right, everything that touches the ground would be encased in ice instantaneously. That's problematic. He put his thoughts on pause for a moment as he activated Analyze Eye. Huh. First time I've seen someone's name shown in blue. As for her skills. Sylvia, 16Y, female, human, magic swordsman. Level. 99. Title. Ice Princess. HP. 1088 1088. 1008. MP. 1332 1000. Strength. 472. Endurance. 316. Agility. 1192. Magic. 852. Luck. 749. Skills. Magic Armor. Unique Skill. Sword Mastery. Rank S. Blue Magic. Rank S. Presence Sensing. Rank A. Danger Detection. Rank A. Mind's Eye. Rank A. Army Command. Rank B. Teaching. Rank C. Writing. Rank C. Auto Healing. Rank S. Magic Attachment. Rank A. Hearty Eating. Rank A. Danger Detection. Rank A. Mind's Eye. Rank A. Army Command. Rank B. Teaching. Rank C. Writing. Rank C. Auto Healing. Rank S. Magic Attachment. Rank A. Hearty Eating. Passive effects. Blessing of the Water Dragon King, Blessing of the Ice Dragon King, Concealment, Rank A, Cooking, Large AGI Increase, Rank S. I've been maintaining air pressure on her this whole time, but she doesn't seem hampered by it in the least. Ever since the start of the match, Kelvin had been using the most powerful version of air pressure that he was capable of, with the target being the entire stage. As proof of it, the frozen platform was slowly sinking into the ground below, with the sole exception being the area around Sylvia's feet. Is this the effect of her unique skill, Magic Armor? Judging by the area that's not sinking, it likely protects her from most magical attacks. If so, she's the natural enemy of all mages. After quickly sorting through his thoughts using parallel processing, Kelvin applied Vortex Edge to all 4 of his swords. Sylvia, however, was already moving by then. Geyser Cataract. The ice on the ground split apart as boiling water burst forth with the momentum of a waterfall, albeit an upside-down one. The jet of water, hot enough to burn someone and imbued with a significant amount of magic, threatened to shoot Kelvin out of the sky but was suppressed by air pressure instead. I've heard that the water from my spell is quite hot. I would imagine. At the same time, Kelvin brought all 4 swords together by their handles as if to form a giant shuriken. What he was now positioning in front of him looked less like a weapon than a shield. Spin. The black swords began to rotate at high speed, repelling the incoming stream of boiling water. Thanks in part to Vortex Edge, the sword shuriken did not let so much as a drop get through. Instead, the deflected water collided with the domed barrier and simply disappeared. While this was going on, Kelvin had sensed Sylvia's rapid ascent. Although his sight was largely obscured by Geyser Cataract, presence sensing told him her exact position, so he threw a few wind shots and a flying slash her way. The slash was faster than the shots, bisecting the water screen as it passed. It looked like it was just about to make contact when, hup! Through the gap that had opened in the curtain of water, Kelvin saw Sylvia easily dodge the flying slash and parry the powerful bursts of wind with her sword. She sure is agile. Just as she had evaded the large quagmire by freezing it over, she had secured footing for herself this time by freezing the boiling water at her feet. She was doing all of this so fast that it was only a matter of time before she reached Kelvin. She seemed to have gotten a fair amount of boiling water on her during the process, but unsurprisingly, it didn't affect her at all. Kelvin showed no sign of moving, though. The reason for that was kaboom! The flying slash from Boreas' death scythe that Sylvia had dodged had finally landed, cleaving straight through the block of ice, formerly the stage, and the ground underneath that was serving as the source of Geyser Cataract. With the eruption of water interrupted, Sylvia lost her footing and was left wide open. Kelvin immediately broke his shuriken back into 4 swords and threw them forward like bullets. All of them flying at a speed that even a rank A adventurer would have no hope of dodging while standing on solid ground. Although obsidian edges were indeed made with magic, they were, ultimately, merely swords that were incredibly tough. As such, the damage they dealt was much more physical than magical. It was Kelvin's hope that this would prove effective against Sylvia in spite of her resistance to magic. Sylvia herself was warned by danger detection of the threat posed by the swords. If she took them head-on, the wound would be severe, if not fatal. But despite the desperate situation, she did not have to stop and think about what to do. It would be more correct to say that her body automatically knew what it needed to do, thanks to her natural talent for battle. Water jetted out from the silver-haired girl's right hand, the one that wasn't currently holding her weapon, not directed at Kelvin but to the side. In doing so, she managed to propel herself out of the way of the first obsidian edge, allowing it to fly by harmlessly. She then used the flat of the blade passing by as a step to climb even higher. The moment her foot landed, an involuntary grunt of pain escaped her lips. Her feet were being torn apart by the Vortex Edge enchantment on the sword, and she left bloody footsteps in her wake. After all, her magic armor provided a high resistance, not complete protection, and she was in direct contact with the spell. But be that as it may, she proceeded to jump onto the second sword, the third, and by the time she was hopping onto the fourth, she was right in Kelvin's face. This is the end. Seen from up close, Sylvia's saber was beautiful like a mirror, allowing Kelvin to catch a clear reflection of himself in the blade. It roared and took on a dangerous hue as it was thrust forward at a godly speed. Its target was his neck. Sylvia found her sword stopped by an invisible force. A wall? Something whirling? Helix Barrier is a spell that blocks both physical and magical spells alike, is how he described it, if I recall. Kelvin's Boreas Death Scythe was on the verge of being swung. At the same time, Sylvia found the obsidian edges, once again reformed into a giant shuriken, quickly closing in on her from behind. Kelvin's favorite robe, Astartes' Embrace, was imbued with many special characteristics. Among other things, it helped to decrease the MP cost of his spells, provided resistance against certain debuffs, and was tough enough to withstand strikes from famed swords forged by blacksmiths of renown. The most noteworthy effect, however, was that it could deconstruct all magic that its wearer came into contact with. This included attacks, buffs, healing, and anything else that accidentally brushed by. The intention behind the spell and the process that led to the contact did not matter. As long as Kelvin touched a spell, the robe had the power to completely unravel its structure and pass that knowledge back to him. If he possessed compatible skills, he could easily learn to use the spell himself with a little bit of practice. If he wanted to, he could even put his own spin on the original. Furthermore, from his experience in the fight against Clive, he had learned to perceive all spells that came into contact with his magic as being in contact with himself. Through Obsidian Edge, he had stolen Helix Barrier from Clive and added it to his own repertoire. Helix Barrier was both a protective wall and a vicious helical wind that would mince anything that came near. Kelvin understood best how useful this spell was, having been on the receiving end of it. The only way to penetrate it was to use something like Ephial's Blaze Arrow, which concentrated all of its destructive power into a single point. No half-hearted attack would leave a mark. However, this barrier was the least of Sylvia's worries at the moment. In front of her, Kelvin was standing ready with Boreas Death Scythe, safely hidden behind his barrier, the corners of his mouth lifted in a grin. Behind her was the windmill of obsidian edges wreathed in vortex edge. And Sylvia herself had lost her balance from the recoil of her sword strike being deflected. The audience, despite not fully understanding the situation, were straining their eyes in an effort to catch every detail of the exchange taking place high above them. In contrast, Sarah, Goldiana, and anyone else who could follow along had all come to the same conclusion, namely, that the match had been decided. Sarah nodded in satisfaction, Ephil and Ryan breathed sighs of relief, and Gerard and Goldiana mentally applauded Kelvin. In the midst of all this, Sylvia's beautiful pupils were simply looking up at the clear, blue sky. There wasn't a single change in her expression. Exact height of the barrier confirmed. The only thing on the girl's mind was how to kill her opponent. Glacial Meteor. The moment the words left her mouth, a giant shadow fell over the entire venue. The spectators' jaws dropped in unison, and Kelvin felt something appear behind his back. As it happened, Sylvia's sword was at the perfect angle to show him a glimpse of a reflection. Hold on, you aren't. A massive comet loomed overhead. Large enough to crush the entire stage, it hung there in midair, barely fitting inside the barrier, threatening to plunge down at any moment. I confirmed using Geyser Cataract that this barrier goes pretty high up. Phew, using a rank S spell is tiring. You plan on killing us both? Nah, I think I'll be fine. Sylvia had the blessing of the Ice Dragon King, which boosted the destructive power of all ice elemental damage she dished out and gave her protection against similar attacks. When pairing that with the effects of her magic armor, she might just make it out alive. The same could not be said for Kelvin. Although he had Helix Barrier deployed, the impact of taking such a blow would likely be enough to activate Colette's magic. He couldn't just land, either. Geyser Cataract had destroyed the stage, which meant that Wintry Expanse could still be active. Exiting the barrier was the surest solution, but doing so would mean forfeiting the match. I can cut through it with Boreas Death Scythe, but at this size, haphazardly cutting it would just generate a ton of smaller fragments that I'd still need to dodge. That only leaves me with one option. Arctic Aegis. As if having read his thoughts, a shield of ice appeared in Sylvia's right hand. In contrast to Gerard's dreadnought, this one was much smaller and looked a lot more maneuverable. Now all I need to do is endure this. You really are the best, Sylvia. As gravity started to pull his opponent back to the ground, Kelvin gave chase, bringing his scythe down. He had decided to finish her off before she could reach the ground. I probably shouldn't let that scythe touch me. Hang in there, Sylvia thought as she thrust her saber 3 times at the staff of Kelvin's weapon in quick succession to forcibly alter its trajectory. He continued to swing, and she continued to parry in the same way. The exchange was furious in its intensity, despite lasting only a few seconds. She's keeping up with me even though she's in free fall and has no footing. This goes way beyond just being agile. Kelvin knew better than anyone that he was at a disadvantage in close quarters combat. However, this was the sky, not the ground. He was using fly to propel himself while Sylvia had nothing of the sort. The weapon mastery skills that they were respectively drawing on were at the same rank. The only difference, then, was their own potential, and that talent could not be measured with numbers and ranks. Kelvin could not be more impressed by his opponent's ability to successfully fend him off in spite of the circumstances. It was Obsidian Edge that eventually tipped the scales, closing in on Sylvia from behind. The giant shuriken hit her flank and dug its way in, making muffled sounds of tearing and ripping as it went. Even the normally expressionless girl could not help but wince at this. Still, it was not a fatal blow. The moment the blades made contact, she slammed Arctic Aegis against them. Rather than parrying, she simply brought the shield down hard. The impact broke several bones in her right hand and shattered the shield itself, but the fragments shone blue and froze the black swords. What? If I spent too long dealing with it, you would have cut me down. Despite the wound to her side, Sylvia's movements didn't slow in the slightest. Rather, Kelvin felt she was getting faster and faster, and this realization made him unbelievably happy. At the moment, he was giving it everything he had, and here was someone who could handle every bit of it. A colossal amount of pressure was pounding on his back from the gigantic hunk of ice, but he couldn't help but consider it another fun factor of the fight. The 4 blades that had been converted into blocks of ice in a split second had lost their momentum and were tumbling to the ground. The vortex edge they were supposed to be cloaked in was showing no sign of breaking through the ice, which likely meant that the magic had already been dispelled. A foothold. Up until then, Kelvin had managed to maintain the perfect distance to allow him to one-sidedly assault Sylvia with the longer reach of his weapon, but now she had regained her footing. He couldn't let her use it to escape, which made combat in their current positions that much more complicated. Kelvin immediately unleashed a hyper-impact in hopes of scrambling the ice all around so that it could no longer be used for footholds. Understanding that the spell would have no direct effect on Sylvia herself. To his astonishment, however, she managed to regain her balance by kicking off the frozen shuriken during the briefest of moments when it passed by her. Blood had already stopped dripping from her greaves, indicating that the wounds she had suffered to her feet were already healing. Showing no sign of pain, her face devoid of expression, and entirely unfazed by the hyper-impact attacks flying all around her, the girl closed in on Kelvin in an instant. Instead of choosing to land, she had opted to take the offensive. You're coming to me. I did promise to kill you. There's no telling what you'd do if I gave you any space. A normal person in this situation would have simply waited for the meteor to fall. But Sylvia chose not to. Kelvin couldn't tell if it had been on a whim or was a decision based on the change in circumstances. The only thing that was certain was that there was no hesitation in her movements. She ducked his great scythe by knocking it upwards with her saber, then threw herself against Helix's barrier. She suffered quite a bit of damage doing so, but the barrier soon gave way and fell apart as it collided with her magic armor. As soon as she was inside, she threw all of her momentum behind her sword, piercing Kelvin's right wrist. Gritting his teeth at the intense pain, Kelvin let go of his staff at the same time that Sylvia pulled her saber back. In the current situation, with his opponent so close and his dominant hand injured, the scythe would only be in the way. Similarly, it would be difficult to fire off any spells at this distance. After pushing parallel processing as hard as possible, the answer it gave him was HNNGG. Too bad for you, I've still got Sarah's combat technique. To use the combat technique skill that he had copied to Skill Eater to put Sylvia into a chokehold. She had unleashed a follow-up attack directed at his neck, but he blocked it by sacrificing his already injured hand, then activated Sonic Acceleration to give his agility stat an explosive boost. Now that he was faster than his opponent, he circled around behind her and, enduring the pain, snaked his hand around her neck to constrict her windpipe. Blood spurted out from his right wrist with the strain of it, and his HP continued to inch down. With the gigantic meteor also closing in from overhead, time was running out fast. Damn, Fly was also dispelled. Is that because of magic armor too? With the spell that had been keeping him afloat losing effect, the two figures that were glued together went into free fall. If that giant lump of ice reaches me, it's your win. If I manage to render you unconscious before then, it's my win. No matter how it ends, thank you for the fight, Sylvia. No sound came from Sylvia's mouth as she struggled desperately to get out of the chokehold. But it was to no avail. Her mind was growing dim, and her grip on the saber was weakening. At this rate, I'll be first to die. With her very last drop of strength, she grabbed her sword with both hands. Fortunately, her broken right hand had already recovered enough to move again. She directed the trembling sword tip towards her own chest. Or to be more specific, her heart. Wait, you're not. Even Kelvin couldn't help but be alarmed. The smile disappeared from his face, but he had no time to react. Sylvia's saber pierced her own heart before skewering his as well. The two of them crashed to the ground and, a split second later, were crushed beneath a massive lump of ice. Hollow diamond. The audience had fallen deathly silent, the air ringing with the fading echoes of the deafening crash. The stage where the two adventurers had fought on was gone without a trace, replaced by an enormous crater that was currently occupied by a massive chunk of ice. The most conspicuous absences, however, were those of the two contestants. They were not up in the air nor were they standing on the ground. Goldiana-san, can you explain what just happened? This seems like an emergency, so I'll keep it brief. While falling, Sylvia Chan pierced her own heart along with Kelvin's as they fell. Then the meteor went boom on top of them. I would think a sword through the heart would be enough to activate the Oracle's spell, right? Or does it, activate twice? It's a one-time use fail-safe. It's an emergency. Save them both. Goldiana's scream jolted everyone back into action. High-ranked adventurers and skilled warriors from various affiliations leapt down into the combat zone. Their immediate response was commendable, but they quickly realized they had no idea what to do about the icy mountain. The closer they got, the more bewildered they became at the sheer size of what Sylvia had generated. What the damn, this is big. How are we supposed to break this? With a hammer? Don't touch it carelessly. You might hurt yourself. We need to melt it with red magic. Someone call. As everyone milled about in consternation, a figure ran over, raising a huge cloud of dust behind them. Get out of my way. Goldiana had jumped right out of his commentator's seat and converted his normally red fighting aura into a shade of pink. The crowd parted without question before him, some capitulating to his sheer intensity, some because they instinctively felt the danger of not doing so. "Everyone, get out of the barrier. I'll move wait." The moment he made to focus his aura around his right fist, the giant lump of ice seemed to shift. "This is, everyone, get back. It's crumbling." Even as he shouted, several lines ran along the surface of the comet. Each fissure was being created by a slicing attack with a weapon. The slashes that flew out climbed into the sky, destroying Colette's barrier and flying off into the distance. A few moments later, the entire lump of ice began to collapse. Now that the barrier was gone, there was nothing preventing the smaller pieces from spilling out beyond the arena. And all the while, dangerous slashes continued to fly out, steadily whittling down the remaining frost. "Run as fast as you can. Mages, set up a new barrier now. Protect the spectators. Hurry." The crumbling of the giant meteor threw the venue into an even bigger state of disarray. Thankfully, there was still quite a bit of space between where the stage used to be and the first tier of seats, so no one had been hurt yet. But it was always better to be safe than sorry, so everyone leapt into action to contribute in any way they could. Pyrohydra Octonary. A single red arrow suddenly shot out from the stands. In the blink of an eye, it burst into flames, then transformed into a fiery dragon with 8 heads. The heads separated to form 8 new dragons that started circling around the ice, their orbits overlapping with each other's. As the ice was continuously shaved away from the inside by the mysterious flying slashes, it was being rapidly melted down from the outside. The flames gradually tightened their noose, sending up huge plumes of steam. Before long, nothing of the ice was left. The crisis had been averted without a single casualty. Eiffel, who had shot the arrow, asked through the network, "Was that enough, Master?" The end of the sentence was delivered with quite a bit more force than was customary for her, hinting at her anger. "Just what I needed, thanks. And come on, don't be so angry, Eiffel." Now that the ice was gone, the crater was bare for all to see, revealing a squarish hole in the ground at its center. All eyes were fixed on that hole as a figure emerged. "Here I am, alive and well after all." Kelvin came into view with Sylvia under one of his arms. The venue erupted into thunderous applause. "Hollow Diamond. Phew, I'm glad I made it in time. In fact, I had thought I was done for. After Sylvia had skewered our hearts, I did actually die for a moment." However, Colette's spell had immediately activated, going so far as to restore me to a state without a sword in my chest. Rather than recovery, it would be more accurate to call what happened a turning back of time. Slightly bewildered by the experience, Sylvia and I exchanged blank looks, question marks practically hovering over our heads. I was still hugging her, but everything had happened so fast that I didn't think the audience had even seen it. If we had been frozen in that state and Mr. Brutal Beast had been present, he would probably have gone insane with rage. Neither of us had much choice in how things played out, but it was lucky for everyone that the mad dog Nagua had been bedridden for the day. Although we had both awoken in a state of confusion, the situation offered no respite. Namely, Sylvia's glacial meteor was still falling, and it was almost on top of our heads. Now that Colette's spell had been activated once, there was no point in continuing the match. So I wrapped an arm around Sylvia, conjured a breeze to bring me my black staff of disaster, which had been falling beside us, and used green magic to dig what was effectively a bomb shelter as fast as I could, taking care not to accidentally touch the remaining traces of wintry expanse. To be extra sure, I even strengthened the walls with adamantite rampart as I went. Only after the meteor's impact and my confirmation that things had settled down did I begin the work of excavating from below using Boreas' death scythe. I had no idea how big the thing actually was, so I adjusted the power of the slashes and angled them to fly straight up into the sky. In order to ensure there were no casualties above ground, I had sent Ephil and the others telepathic messages asking them to help on their side. That was how we had stayed alive. My handling of the situation had been a bit off the cuff, but the end result was satisfactory, all things considered. I didn't even have to activate my trump card, the blessing from Melfina, in front of the crowd. I didn't manage to kill you. So frustrating. No, you did kill me. There was literally a sword in my heart. Wait, was she? Did you approach me in the middle of the fall because you were planning on killing me twice? I did promise to do my best. In this case, that meant having to do it twice. That's what I came up with when I thought about how to do it during the match. How is she saying that with such a straight face? I know I'm not in a position to comment on other people, but this girl is pretty out there. Although in the context of our fight, the misconception is definitely in line with the general direction of what I wanted. Amid the unending praise and ovation, two voices rose up from the commentators' seats. Isn't it such a relief that everything worked out in the end, Colette-sama? Why was I made to sit in here? I'm not feeling all that good right now, actually. For some reason, Pretia's seat was now occupied by Colette. Because of the absolutely unprecedented outcome of today's match, of course. Activation of your magic is our usual criterion for deciding the winner, but today we saw its simultaneous activation on both contestants. Therefore, we have no idea how to call the outcome. So, you're asking me to make the call? That's right. I couldn't see them from down in the crater, but I could almost imagine Colette sighing. To be exact, the activation was not entirely simultaneous. The time difference is almost imperceptible, but chronologically speaking, Sylvia Sands' sword pierced her own heart before it pierced Kelvin Sands. As such, it was her spell that technically activated first. So you're saying? That's right. Accordingly, the winner of this match is Kelvin San. Congratulations. Woa. Although the Oracle had seemed a bit of a mess before the match, she was clearly used to speaking to large crowds of people. The skillful way in which she delivered the pronouncement caused the audience to explode into an even higher state of frenzied cheers. So, the winner is Kelvin San. Now this is a match that is sure to go down in history. Even though I understood pretty much none of it. It was indeed a match that was worth seeing. As a representative of Deramus, I'd also love to INV, Colette-sama? Why are you suddenly covering your the mic? Mute the mic. I watched my companions rushing towards me with the music of truly tragic sounds in the background. I don't think I'll ever forget this day, either. Located just to the south of the square in the heart of Parth was a clock tower that had been there since the city's founding by its 4 neighboring countries. A symbol of the order attained by the signing of the peace accord, the structure towered over everything else in the city and was a famous tourist location. Near its very top was a viewing platform from which the whole city could be seen. The place was usually open to the public and, naturally, was quite popular with visitors. Now, however, the top of the clock tower seemed empty and abandoned. After all, the people of Parth had been wrapped up in their festivities since early that morning, and there was a match between 2 rank S adventurers going on at that very moment. The tourists who would normally be coming and going were nowhere to be seen, every last one of them having been drawn away by what was happening in the central square. But the viewing platform was not entirely vacant. There was a lone figure there, looking down at the Colosseum from where he stood. So, she really is. The gaze of the man in armor was directed at Kelvin's opponent for the match, Sylvia. He nodded several times as if he had just confirmed something. The great general of the Steel Knight Order is spectating all the way out here, without a single bodyguard in sight? That voice, is that you, Kokudori? The man turned around calmly, not upset in the least about having been identified. The one who had called out to him was the dwarven member of Sylvia's party. And as Kokudori had discerned, the man who had been watching the match was indeed Dan Dalba, General of the Steel Knight Order of Tryson. What an honor it is for such an esteemed personage to remember the name of one such as me. I don't believe we're personally acquainted, though. I make it a point to remember the faces and names of powerful fighters. That's an interesting remark for someone from a country that hates other races with such a passion. The country's stance might be as you say, but no one truly subscribes to that idea. And every once in a while, you get people like me. Most of all, if you intend to take that logic of yours to the extreme, then everything you say to me, you'd have to say to her down there, wouldn't you? Dan said, pointing towards the Colosseum. At that very moment, an enormous lump of ice had appeared in the air. Well, I'll be. Lunoir's already gained a rank S spell of her own? She sure has grown over the past 2 years. Ah, no, I'm sorry. She goes by Sylvia now, doesn't she? And is that Ashley I see in the stands? You've worked it out, then. She's grown out her hair and took off that muffler she was always wearing. But as I said, I make it a point to remember the faces of powerful fighters. What are you planning to do with her? The air surrounding Kokudori changed, warping into a pressure that bore down on Dan. The old general, however, looked unfazed. He lifted his shoulders in a shrug to indicate that he wasn't there to fight. Come on, don't be so on edge. I'm not here to force her to come home, if that's what you're worried about. What, then? The atmosphere softened, just a little. This is a letter from Shuto-sama. Please pass it on to Lunoir. A letter? Dan passed an envelope to Kokudori that bore the wax seal of the royal family of Tryson. When Lunoir and Ashley disappeared 2 years ago, Shuto-sama was terribly saddened. With her station being what it was, Lunoir was the only person Shuto-sama could speak to frankly and openly. Shuto-sama mobilized the Black Ops, but they couldn't find anything and she eventually had no choice but to call them back. I'm not surprised. I have no idea why she's making an appearance as an adventurer now, and I do not plan on doing anything about it, not after all this time. The only people who've figured out her new identity are Shuto-sama, myself, and a few others I know I can trust. I don't wish to do anything that would make Shuto-sama more upset. What are you saw? Read that letter, I'm sure it'll answer a lot of your questions. Well, it's about time for me to be getting back. My age seems to be doing quite a number on me these days. Can you even comprehend how tough it was coming all the way here on horseback? Nobody wants to get old, eh? Dan grimaced, pounding his waist a few times. You aren't going to ask why Sylvia left? Kokudori asked suddenly as the other man reached the stairs. Although the dwarf was no longer emanating an aura of hostility, he still had his guard up. If I ask her to, will she come back? Probably not, right? Doing so would only reignite my feelings of regret. She disappeared without a word to even Shuto-sama, her closest friend. I imagine her reasons were weighty enough to reflect that choice, and that the decision was not made lightly. As such, I am willing to accept things as they are. Shuto-sama has also forgiven her. Her successor's been nothing but true. Oh, wait, no, he's no longer with us, either. Without saying more, Dan turned and disappeared down the stairs, raising one hand in a casual farewell, but not bothering to turn back again.